December 08, 64,253. 67,466 in December 09, 70,839. December 10 and 74,381. December 11. That represents 5% per year over that 4-year period.
Is that your motion?
That's the motion.
Is there a second to the motion? Mr. Legess with a second. Any discussion? Roll call vote.
Discussion.
Oh, I'm sorry, Kathy. I'm sorry.
I would just like to tell you a little bit about my office before you set my salary for the next 4 years. Like Rick said, I have 44 full-time employees. I have 5 part-time. I've got 5 offices. I've got 3 on the first floor of the courthouse and 2 on the second floor. Plus I have 9 courtrooms and 9 judges to keep happy every day. A typical day for me, I usually arrive at work between 7:30 and 8 o'clock. I sit down with my chief deputy and we determine who is missing that day. It's very rare that I have a day where everybody is there for the whole day. Between the 2 of us, we determine which desk or desks we're going to cover that day and which office we're going to work our lunch hour in to keep the lunch hour covered. Even if we don't cover a lunch hour in a particular department, we usually don't take lunch because working through the lunch hour is one less hour you have to stay after work. So when everybody goes home at 4:30, Paul and I, then we sit down and we either work on catching up a backlog here and there, or we work on our own work. We typically leave the courthouse between 6:30 and 7:30 every night. Usually about that time her husband starts calling because he's hungry and he wants her to come home and fix supper. So that's usually about what time we leave. We do come in on Saturday and Sunday. Sometimes we may just come in and work a couple hours. Sometimes we come in and work the whole day. I try not to work both Saturday and Sunday, but sometimes that's not possible. So I do come in both days sometimes, and so does Paula. Paula gets comp time for her overtime hours, but honestly, she probably has months worth of comp time on the books. She'll never take it. Last year, she didn't even take her vacation because she feels bad about leaving the office because there's always so much work to do that she just rolls her vacation at the end of the year into her extended illness bank. I do feel bad about her working so many hours. My office has increased revenues over the year. I realized early on as circuit clerk that my operating expenses each year were more than what the revenue was in the circuit clerk's office. So I contacted the Circuit Clerks Association, and through our efforts we changed the clerk's fee statute of the Illinois Revised Statute, and it hadn't been changed since 1976. And I'm proud to report that due to our efforts back in 2002, the clerk's fees that went into general fund were $679,000, and last year in 2007 it was $1,486,000. So my office is now self-supporting. In addition to the $1,486,000, there's been a change in tickets over the years, and I also put $292,000 into the percentage general fund percentage tickets. About a third of that normally would have been included in clerk's fees. So I am very proud of that. We've also stepped up our collections department so that we're getting defendants to comply with paying the fine and costs that the court has ordered them to pay. I've run into a situation recently where we need to hire a project manager for our integrated criminal justice system that we're in the middle of working on. We did hire one last year. The committee's recommendation at that time was that their salary be similar or more than mine. I objected to that. I didn't think my employees should make more than me. We did hire a project manager at a lower salary. She stayed 6 months and she left because she got a higher paying job in Chicago. We're now in the process of hiring another project manager, and I've had the same objection. I don't think my employees should make more than I do. But we do want to hire a project manager who's going to stay for a few years and who is qualified to do the job. I know that the original recommendation for the salary that was set, the original one I saw, actually I read it in the newspaper, was $72,000 for my job next year. I realize that's a huge increase over what I am making now, and I understand why people would be taken aback by that, but in my opinion, it's a one-time salary adjustment. Lynn compared salaries to other counties of similar size, what their elected officials are making, and took into account the size of my office. I can tell you, by having 44 employees, I do have a lot of personnel issues, which are very stressful. I've got several people on attendance programs right now. I've had to suspend a couple people in the past year. I've had to terminate a couple people. That's very, very stressful, and it is, one of the most stressful parts of my job. I just would like you to take all of that into account. Right now, my salary is identical to the treasurer and the county clerk. I believe Mark has 4 employees, and I think Bruce has about 8. I think that we're very lucky to have Bruce and Mark as elected officials. I think they do an excellent job, but they don't do my job. And I feel like I'm being paid to run a small department similar to theirs while I do run a large department. And I would just like you to take that into account when you determine my salary for the next 4 years. Thanks.
Thank you, Kathy. Any input coming from the committee? Mr. Scholl.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One thing that I find disconcerting about setting these salaries, we do the comps were done, the comparables were done, and then we play tiddlywinks with the data that the comparables have established. I think we need to be determined at this point to look in a long-term, set up a long-term metrics or something of that nature, so that we have a coherent policy towards establishing county salaries.
Any other comments or questions? Mr. Lejeune.
I can't disagree with what everything Kathy said. It's probably very true. The only thing that bothers me is we look at elected officials, but we don't look at appointed officials. We set the elected, we set the chairman, we let the chairman set the appointed. I think we really need to take a hard look at the appointed salaries too.
Mr. Collector.
I would just like to take a moment to thank Ms. Thomas for the work she does. And, for overseeing 44 people, 49 I believe if you include the part-timers. That is, that is I'll tell you, for the salary you make, thank you for staying with the county. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? If not, we'll move to a vote on this. It's a roll call.
Mr. Bossert?
Aye.
Mr. Kalecki?
Aye.
Mr. Lejes?
Aye.
Mr. Lear?
Aye.
Mr. Scholl?
Aye.
Mr. Stauffenberg?
Aye.
Mr. Washington? Ms. Wilson? Aye. Mr. Vickery?
Aye. Motion carries.
Mr. Chairman, in regards to the coroner's position, I would make a motion that the compensation for the 4 years be $60,811, $63,852, $67,045, $70,397. That also represents 5% per year over that 4-year period.
Is there a second to that motion? Mr. Kalecki with a second. Is there any discussion? Question, Mr. James.
Thank you. Once again, he's pretty handy, this Jim. Once again, I want to point out about the 25% benefits. I have difficulty going over 3%. I can see a 5% the first year and 3% consecutive years thereafter. You're basically talking about a 21.55% increase over 4 years, which is, like I want to point out one more time, we're in a recession, guys, and we're in a deficit, and we've got some expenses coming up. I don't think we really can enjoy doing what we could have done 2 years ago when we were working with a budget that we had money left over and stuff. And I think that's something we ought to take a long, hard look at seriously. So I would like to see that amend to change to the 5% first year, 3% the following years thereafter, which I think would be in line and acceptable to the taxpayers.
Mr. Lear.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I hear what I'm hoping is not true. A note of pessimism in the board members' remarks. Certainly, I don't anticipate that even this recession will last 4 years. So I'm not sure why we're talking about the difficulty of setting these for 4 years in a row. When you start looking at the economy, it just kind of blows my mind. And that's basically what I want to say. I don't have any idea how I can predict what the economy is going to look like 4 years from now. And so I think we have to use some standard other than our understanding what the economy is right now.
And I think Mr. McCarty's report shows that the CPI at 4.1 right now. Rick?
Just a quick comment, if I might. Just for your own personal edification, a lot of the things that drive these higher salaries you have to keep in mind in the union contracts have been negotiated over the last 10 years. Some of these contracts and some of the negotiations, which the board members have been involved in, and they know how difficult those negotiations are. They know how tough the numbers are. They know the numbers when they're getting crunched. But when you bring in these contracts and these salaries are going up, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe the correctional officers, they were paid so terribly in the beginning of the first contract. They went from $27,000 to $23,000 or $24,000, and they finally started getting decent people to apply for those jobs. So these contracts drive numbers. So keep that in mind, please.
Mr. Schultz?
Yes, I'd just like to make a comment pertaining to the coroner's office as well as the circuit clerk's office. When we have professional organizations, professional people running these departments, we have to stand back in awe and appreciation of them. The coroner's office has been elevated. Just in the period of time that I've been on the board, I've seen it elevated and the involvement of the coroner in many different organizations throughout the state. And one example that was given the other day, that people coming to Kankakee to take classes out at the morgue, I don't know what the proper term there is, but classes being given out there. I mean, this is a fantastic feather in the bonnet for Kankakee County, I believe.
Any other comments or questions? Be a roll call vote.
Mr. Bossert?
Aye.
Mr. Kalecki?
Aye.
Mr. Lejeune? Mr. Lear?
Aye.
Mr. Scholl?
Aye.
Mr. Stauffenberg?
Aye.
Ms. Wilson? Aye. Mr. Vickery?
Aye. Motion carries. Chairman, recognize Mr. Bossert again.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. In regards to the position of auditor, numbers I'm going to present are at variance with even in what's today's handout. I would move that the position of auditor for next year, $59,652. Year after, $61,442. Third year, $63,285. Fourth year, $65,184. This would reflect moving the auditor's compensation up equal to what I anticipate the recorder's position would be in the first year, well, all 4 years, actually. By way of explanation, the numbers that were being looked at among our board members as we were passing spreadsheets around, we made an error in looking at the current compensation for the auditor, which is slightly less than that of the recorder right now. Looking back at our minutes and resolutions from 4 years ago, that position was held back again because of a new position or a new member in that, a new auditor in that position. And the discussion at the time was to move that salary back up to equal with recorder, and, you know, we tend to forget those things as after 4 years pass, so this is an effort to rectify that. This would reflect a 5.1% in the front year and then 3% thereafter.
Is there a second to that motion? Mr. Pilecki with a second. Any discussion? Questions? If not, we'll have a roll call vote.
Mr. Bossert.
Aye.
Mr. Pilecki.
Aye.
Mr. Lejes.
Aye.
Mr. Lear.
Aye.
Mr. Scholl.
Aye.
Mr. Stauffenberg.
Aye.
Ms. Wilson. Aye. Mr. Vickery.
Aye. Motion carries. Thank you. Mr. Bossert.
And lastly, in regards to the recorder position, I would move that the compensation be $59,652 in the front year. Next year, $61,442. The second year, $63,285 in the third year. $65,184 in the fourth year. That would reflect 3% per year over the 4 years.
Is there a second to that motion? Mr. Scholl with a second. Any discussion or questions? Mr. Scholl.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to reiterate a statement that was made. Mr. Enns made a comment pertaining to a new individual coming into the office. The idea of paying them, since they don't have the experience necessarily, a lower salary. Unfortunately, in an electoral process, I don't feel that we're in a position to do that. Because one can never forecast actually who is going to win the election, and if indeed the person who is taking that office will or will not have the experience. I just wanted to address that issue before we move on.
Any other questions or comments? We'll move to a roll call.
Mr. Bossert.
Aye.
Mr. Pilecki.
Aye.
Mr. Lejes.
Aye.
Mr. Lear.
Aye.
Mr. Scholl.
Aye.
Mr. Stauffenberg.
Aye.
Ms. Wilson. Aye. Mr. Vickery.
Aye. Motion carries. Board member payroll. Board member.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I move that board member compensation for the odd number board member collect $68 per diem. 2008, 2000, and starting in December 08, $70 per diem, December 09, $72 per diem, and December 010, and $74 December 11.
Mr. Lear with a second. Is there any questions or comments? Mr. Scholl.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, I'll have to go on record as opposed to this increase for the simple reason I know the board members spend extra time, more time than what they're compensated for, attending the extra meetings and so forth. But in all honesty, I just cannot see that this increase is necessary at this time. I would like to freeze it for, and move forward with it from that. But I cannot support this.
Any other questions or comments? Roll call vote.
Mr. Bossert.
Aye.
Mr. Pilecki.
Aye.
Mr. Lejes.
Aye.
Mr. Lear.
Aye.
Mr. Scholl.
Nay.
Mr. Stauffenberg.
Aye.
Ms. Wilson. Aye. Mr. Vickery.
Aye. Motion carries. Okay. Next on the agenda is a resolution supporting funding for cooperative extension. Mr. Lear.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This came up first in community services. One of the members requested that the county take some action in regard to what has happened by the governor in his choice to actually cut money that had been budgeted and appropriated for extension services. This, as I'm sure all board members know, has resulted in a serious reduction of services in terms of county. A number of people have been laid off, and so I'd ask that the board go on record as opposing the action of the governor in terms of funding for cooperative extension.
Is that in form of motion, Mr. Lear?
Yes.
Look for a second. Mr. Pilecki with a second. All in favor, signify by discussion.
I'd like to throw one comment out there real quick. I serve on the U of I Extension Council here in town, and it is just mind-boggling to me that these cuts across the state of Illinois in the area of agriculture and agricultural education, it's going to affect a lot of people. 4-H in Kankakee County and other counties as well will effectively be no more. Those affect a very large population of our, or a very large percentage of our population here in Kankakee County. One thing I would like to throw out there, since we are discussing this, is I don't know the legality of this, and unfortunately I believe the state's attorney's left for the day already. There is a significant amount of funds that the U of I Extension Council gets from the county board that is part of their matching state funds. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that money has already been budgeted in our budget for this fiscal year. Is it possible to pass a resolution to give them that money even if the state cuts their funding? There would be no match. Huh?
Mr. Foster, perhaps I can address some of that. Taxpayers in this county passed a referendum a number of years ago to specifically fund the extension service through a tax levy with a limit of 2.5 cents per 100. As part of the county board levy, in fact, we saw the discussion earlier about our levy. There's one line item in that levy that pertains to extension. It's collected by the county and passed back to local extension council. So that gave the county extension service a stable source of funding that's not subject to the whims of a county board from year to year. So that money is available, has been collected, and will be collected this year, and is deposited with, actually ends up at the U of I in a trust account and is used to pay local expenses and staffing and so forth. That money is still there and will not go away. The gist of the discussion right now is can we possibly squeeze a little more money out of our levy toward and shift it towards the extension line item in the levy. The authority granted by the taxpayers was 2.5 cents per 100. In recent years, they've only accessed 2 cents a 100. There's a little bit of room there within their legal authority. Of course, at this point, it's a tug of war over, a few scraps over between veterans assistance and the retirement account and extension and, several other sources that would like a little extra funding. So, again, it's not a matter that the entire funding has disappeared. In fact, there's contingency plans are in place right now to continue with most of their staff, at least for temporarily, until this whole thing shakes out. Kankakee County is one of the 2 counties in the whole state that has actually a surplus left over from past years in their trust account and are able to get by here for a little bit of time. One of the problems in the extension system is you have academic professionals that are on staff, and they have some guarantees in terms of senior or tenure. And even if they receive a termination notice right now, a number of them get a year on staff yet to finish out, and at a minimum 6 months. So it's awfully expensive for a system like that to wind down. Appreciate the resolution effort, and I'm a little bit close to that situation because I'm housed in that office and I'm involved in some of those discussions. In fact, I'm not directly affected, but maybe enough indirect effect there that I may have to abstain on any kind of resolution here. Resolutions are fine. Of course, they're looking for funds. And if we're passing resolutions, what about Soil Conservation Service, who has had some drastic reductions in their budget because of money held up in the Department of Agriculture budget? A number of other general revenue items that are in the Department of Ag budget are also cut, and a number of those things that affect us locally. So I would support a resolution, and yet there are other worthy causes as well, and where do we stop with that?
Well, we have a motion and a second on the resolution to the state. Is there any other questions or comments on that? If not, it'll be a voice vote, and all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, like saying. Motion carries. As far as further movement on this, let's put this on the agenda for next month, and we'll do some more research on it, and we'll bring forward any other action that we might be able to take, all right? Thank you. And is there any other, Mr. Legends?
I would like, since the, I don't know if I'm on or not. Since the recommendations for the elected officials came from the executive committee, I would like to recommend that the executive committee get a list of the appointed county officials, what their salaries are, when they received their raises, and what those raises were. Because I think, you know, Kathy Thomas made a valid point. You know, we scrutinized her office, and she does one heck of a job with a lot of employees, and I think we need to look at the other people to see what kind of salaries they're making, to see if they're justified, and what kind of raises they got, to see if they're justified. And I'd like to make that recommendation to the executive committee.
Thank you. I think it's a point well taken, Mr. Scholl.
Yes, I think that's an excellent idea of it. You know, I find it disturbing when we have a department head that is making less than someone within her department. I mean, that's inexcusable.
Is there any old business to come before the committee? Mr. Scholl.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to address an issue that has been hanging around forever and a day and was brought up again in public comment, the delegation agreement. This seems like it's been hanging out there in limbo forever. I know the argument was used with respect to financial costs, the cost with respect to liability and so forth. We need to get a report back. I don't know if it would be, if it's a financial matter, it needs to come back to this committee. If it is not a financial matter, it should come back to the PCA. But I would like to hear a follow-up on where we are at on this delegation agreement. The water condition throughout the western part of the county, we've got to keep a handle on this. Runoff and contamination, so forth, we have to keep up with that.
I agree, and I think we should express that to both executive and PCA to move forward on this delegation agreement. Is there any other old business to come before the committee? Is there any new business to come before the committee? Is there any new business to come before the committee? If not, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn. Motion by Mr. Kalecki, second by Ms. Wilson. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, like same. Meeting is adjourned.